Have you ever had that feeling? The one where you're certain you're alone, but something tells you that you're being watched. That prickling sensation on the back of your neck, like invisible fingers tracing your spine. That feeling has haunted me since childhood. I used to blame it on an overactive imagination. Now I know better. Welcome to the Obscuralore Vault. Today's story will make you question every unexplained noise in your house, every shadow that seems to move when you look away. Because sometimes the things we dismiss as childish fantasy are waiting patiently for us to remember them. Our story today. My family moved into my deceased grandmother's house. Her recordings of our childhood, imaginary friends, prove they were never imaginary. Part 1. Homecoming. The first thing that struck me when we pulled into Grandmother Eleanor's driveway was how the house seemed to watch us arrive. The windows, dark, empty eyes tracking our movement as we stepped out of the car. My wife Sarah squeezed my hand. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded, though the lie was transparent. How could I explain that coming back here felt like walking willingly into the jaws of something hungry? It had been 3 weeks since the funeral. Eleanor Blackwood, my father's mother, had passed peacefully in her sleep at 94. The reading of the will surprised everyone. She left the sprawling Victorian house to me, not my father, not my older brother James, but to me, Michael Blackwood, the grandson who'd stopped visiting 20 years ago. "It's big," Sarah whispered as we stepped inside, our footsteps echoing across hardwood floors. Our 4-year-old daughter Emma clung to her leg, eyes wide, taking in the high ceilings and ornate woodwork. "It's exactly the same," I murmured. The house smelled of mothballs and old books, and something else, something I remembered from childhood visits but could never name, a sweetness underneath the dust, like overripe fruit. "Dad, Dad," my 8-year-old son Peter called from upstairs. "There's a room full of toys up here." Sarah gave me a concerned look. "Toys? I thought your grandmother lived alone." I climbed the stairs, following Peter's voice to the room at the end of the hall, the one grandmother always kept locked when we visited as children. Now the door stood ajar, revealing walls lined with antique toys, porcelain dolls with cracked faces, wooden puppets with tangled strings, music boxes covered in dust, and in the center, a child-sized table set for a tea party with 5 empty chairs. "Can I play with them?" Peter asked, reaching for a puppet. My hand shot out, grabbing his wrist. "No, these aren't for playing with." Peter looked up at me, confused by my sudden harshness. Truth was, I didn't understand my reaction either. Something about those toys made my skin crawl, memories scratching at the edge of consciousness. "Let's go unpack," I said, leading him away. As we walked down the hall, I could swear I heard whispers from behind the closed door, the sound of tiny chairs scraping against the floor. Part 2. Strange Findings. 3 days into our new living arrangement, we began to notice things. Small things at first. Emma's stuffed animals rearranged when no one was looking. Doors we'd closed finding themselves open. Cold spots in rooms despite the summer heat. "Daddy," Emma said at breakfast, spooning cereal into her mouth, "who's the little boy that plays in my room at night?" The question made me freeze. Sarah looked up from her coffee. "What little boy, sweetie?" she asked. "The one who whispers. He says he's been waiting for me." Emma smiled. "He knows my name." Sarah laughed nervously. "Sounds like someone has an imaginary friend." I didn't laugh. I remembered having an imaginary friend in this house too, a little boy named Thomas who lived in the walls. I never told my parents about him because Thomas said they wouldn't understand. Thomas who whispered things that no child should know. "Michael?" My father's voice crackled over the line when I called him later that day. "How's the old house treating you?" "Fine," I lied. "Dad, did I ever talk about imaginary friends when I stayed here as a kid?" A long pause. "Why do you ask?" "Emma mentioned seeing a boy in her room. It reminded me of something." "Kids have active imaginations," he said dismissively. "Listen, Michael, your mother and I never understood why Eleanor left you the house, but now that you have it, be careful." "Careful of what?" "Just, some places have history. That house has been in the family for generations. Things happen there that can't be explained." That night, I couldn't sleep. Sarah's breathing beside me was deep and regular, but my mind raced. Around 3 in the morning, I got up and went to check on the children. Peter was sprawled across his bed, one arm dangling toward the floor, but when I pushed Emma's door open, she wasn't alone. She sat cross-legged on the floor, talking animatedly to an empty space across from her. When the door opened, she looked up, annoyed at the interruption. "Emma, who are you talking to?" I whispered. "Thomas," she said simply. "He lives here." The blood froze in my veins. "What did you say?" "Thomas. He says he knows you. He says you used to play together." I backed out of the room, shutting the door. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely make it back to bed. The next morning, I decided to explore the attic. If this house was going to reveal its secrets, I needed to understand what we were dealing with. The heat was oppressive under the eaves. Dust motes danced in the beams of light cutting through the small windows. The attic was a maze of forgotten furniture, trunks and boxes, family history stacked and abandoned. That's when I found the old steamer trunk with my name written on it in grandmother's precise handwriting. Inside were toys I recognized from my childhood, a teddy bear missing an eye, a set of tin soldiers, books with dog-eared pages. But beneath them, wrapped carefully in tissue paper, was a reel-to-reel tape recorder and dozens of labeled cassettes. Michael, age 5, read the first tape. Michael, age 6, read another. With trembling fingers, I set up the machine and threaded the first tape. The reels began to turn, and after some static, I heard a voice I hadn't heard in decades. My grandmother's, younger but unmistakable. "Recording session 1, subject, Michael Blackwood, age 5 years, 3 months, date June 12, 1990. My grandmother's voice was clinical, detached, not the warm woman I remembered baking cookies and telling stories. "Michael, can you tell me about your friend again? The one you were talking to last night?" And then, my own voice, high-pitched with childhood, sent shivers down my spine. "Thomas doesn't want me to talk about him. He says it's against the rules." "It's okay, Michael. Thomas won't know. This is just between us." A long pause on the tape. Then my child voice dropped to a whisper. "Thomas isn't like us. He says he's been here forever. He knows things, secret things, about what happens in the dark." "What does Thomas look like, Michael?" "He looks like a boy, except when he doesn't. Sometimes he has too many fingers. Sometimes his face moves." I sat in stunned silence, dust swirling around me in the attic light. The memories came flooding back, not just of Thomas, but of the others. The little girl with black eyes who stood at the foot of my bed, the tall, thin something that watched from the closet. Grandmother hadn't been recording to preserve cute childhood memories. She'd been documenting something else entirely. I grabbed the recorder and several tapes, hurrying downstairs. I needed to find Sarah, to explain that we needed to leave this house immediately. Instead, I found Peter standing in the hallway, staring at the toy room door, which now stood wide open. "They want me to come play," he said, his voice oddly flat. They've been so lonely without children in the house. Part 3. The recordings. We need to talk, I said to Sarah that evening after we'd put the children to bed. I placed the tape recorder on the kitchen table between us. Sarah looked at it skeptically. What's this about, Michael? I think my grandmother was studying something in this house, something about children and what they see. I played her portions of the recordings, my 5-year-old self describing friends that defied natural explanation. My 6-year-old voice recounting nighttime visits from Thomas, who told me secrets about the house, about the family, about things buried in the garden. Kids have imaginary friends, Sarah said, but uncertainty crept into her voice. Listen to this one, I said, changing the tape. Recording session 23. Subject, James Blackwood, age 8 years, 2 months. Date, August 3rd, 1985. My brother's voice came through next, describing a tall man who stood in the corners of rooms, who followed him through the house but never into sunlight. And what does this tall man want, James? My grandmother asked. He wants to wear me, my brother replied matter-of-factly, like clothes. Sarah's face had gone pale. This is disturbing, but it doesn't mean... There are dozens of tapes, I interrupted. Not just me and James, my father, my uncle, cousins, every child who ever stayed in this house, all describing the same entities, the same friends, across generations. We both looked up at the ceiling. Emma's room. Are you saying our children are in danger? Sarah whispered. I don't know what I'm saying, but something's happening in this house, something my grandmother knew about, maybe even studied. I played one final recording, dated just 6 months before grandmother's death. Her voice, now aged and frail. Final observations on the Blackwood house phenomena. After 60 years of documentation, I believe the entities are neither supernatural nor hallucination, but something in between. Consciousness given form through collective belief, perhaps. Or visitors from somewhere else drawn to the developing minds of children. A pause, then. I leave this house to Michael because he saw them most clearly. They spoke to him most directly. He needs to understand what walks beside us, unseen by adult eyes. The veil between worlds is thinnest in children and thinnest of all in this house. They are waiting for him to return. They have always been waiting. Sarah stood up abruptly. That's enough. We're leaving tomorrow. We'll sell this place. I started to agree when a child's scream cut through the house. Emma! We both shouted, running for the stairs. Emma sat bolt upright in bed, her eyes wide and unfocused. He's here, she whispered as we rushed to her side. Thomas says you're going to make them angry if you leave. Sarah gathered Emma in her arms while I checked the closet, under the bed, behind the curtains. The room was empty, but the air felt thick, charged with static electricity. No one's here, sweetheart, Sarah soothed. Just a bad dream. Emma shook her head vehemently. Not a dream. Thomas says Grandma Eleanor knew the rules. He says you have to listen to the rest of the tapes. Sarah's eyes met mine over Emma's head. Our daughter had never met my grandmother. We hadn't mentioned the tapes to her. What rules, Emma? I asked, my mouth dry. The rules of the house, she said, as if it were obvious. Thomas says they let us live here, as long as we follow the rules. They've always let the family stay, as long as we remember them, as long as we play with them. Who is they, Emma? Emma tilted her head, as if listening to a voice we couldn't hear. The ones who were here first, the ones who never left. Part 4. The Revelations. The next morning, Sarah took the children to the park. I needed time alone with the tapes. needed to understand what my grandmother had discovered over decades of research. Tape after tape revealed similar patterns. Children describing entities that adults couldn't see, imaginary friends with knowledge they shouldn't possess, strange occurrences throughout the house, objects moving, voices in empty rooms, cold spots, but it was the final set of tapes that chilled me to the bone. Not recordings of children, but my grandmother's personal research notes spoken aloud as if for posterity. The Blackwood property was built in 1887 on land previously belonging to a religious sect that practiced unorthodox rituals. According to local records, the entire group vanished without trace in 1886. Construction workers reported unusual findings during excavation, strange symbols carved into foundation stones, small bones in the soil. Theory: the house exists at an intersection point between realities. The entities are not ghosts in the traditional sense, but residents of a parallel space that occasionally overlaps with our own. Children, with their more flexible perception, can see across this boundary. The entities form attachments to certain children. They seem particularly drawn to the Blackwood bloodline. The imaginary friends remember each child, even after the child grows up and forgets them. They wait for those children to return as adults to bring new children into the house. I have made a bargain with them. Protection for the family in exchange for documentation, for companionship. They are lonely. They need to be remembered, to be believed in. The Blackwood house must always have children. There must always be someone who can see them. I sat back, shaken. My grandmother hadn't just been studying the phenomena. She'd been facilitating it, ensuring its continuation through generations. "Michael," my brother James sounded surprised when he answered. "Everything okay at the house?" "Did you have imaginary friends here as a kid?" I asked without preamble. A long silence. "Why are you asking about that?" "I found grandmother's recordings, about Thomas, about the tall man, about all of them." James's breathing quickened. "You shouldn't have gone looking for that stuff, Michael. Some things are better left alone." "My kids are seeing them now, James. Emma's talking to Thomas." "Listen to me very carefully," my brother said, his voice tight. "Don't fight it. Don't try to leave. The house chose you for a reason." "What are you talking about? Why do you think I never had children? Why do you think Dad moved us across the country when we were kids? That house, and it needs children." Grandmother understood that. She made arrangements. "What arrangements?" I demanded. "The house must always have children," James quoted. "She left it to you because you have Peter and Emma, the perfect age. Old enough to communicate with them, young enough to see them clearly." "I have to go," I said. "Sarah's back with the kids." "Michael, wait." I hung up, but as I turned toward the stairs, I realized the footsteps coming up weren't Sarah's. They were too heavy, too deliberate. "Sarah?" I called out. No answer, just the steady climb of something large. I backed away as my bedroom door swung open. The hallway beyond was empty, yet something pushed into the room, something that displaced the air, that made the light bend slightly. The tape recorder on the bed clicked on by itself. Through bursts of static I heard a child's voice, not from the tape but seemingly from the air itself. "You came back," it said. Not a child's voice anymore, but something using a child's voice like an ill-fitting mask. "We've been so patient, Michael, so very patient." The sensation of being watched intensified. I could feel them now, not just Thomas, but all of them. The entities from the recordings, the things that generations of Blackwood children had seen. "What do you want?" I whispered. "To be remembered," came the reply now from behind me. "To play, to not be alone." I ran from the room down the stairs to answer the phone, anything to break the suffocating presence that had filled my bedroom. "Hello?" I gasped into the receiver. "Michael, it's Sarah. We're at the hospital." My blood turned to ice. "What happened?" "It's Peter. He was playing on the swings and just froze. Fell off. He keeps saying someone pushed him, but no one was there. He's okay, just a sprained wrist. But he's saying the strangest things." "What things?" Sarah's voice dropped. "He says Thomas is angry that we tried to leave. He says we need to follow the rules." Part 5. The Bargain. Peter sat on the examination table, his wrist wrapped in a blue cast. His eyes met mine when I entered the room, but something was different about his gaze. A watchfulness that hadn't been there before. "The doctor says it's a clean break," Sarah explained. "He was lucky." "It wasn't luck," Peter said, his voice oddly mature. "They just wanted to remind us." Emma sat quietly in the corner chair, drawing on a hospital notepad. When I glanced over her shoulder, I saw she'd drawn our family standing in front of the house, but we weren't alone. Shadowy figures stood behind each of us, their hands resting on our shoulders. "Let's get you both home," I said, forcing a smile. "It's been a long day." Sarah caught my arm as the children gathered their things. "We're not really going back there, are we?" she whispered. I showed her Emma's drawing. "I don't think we have a choice. Not yet. I need to understand what we're dealing with first." The house seemed to welcome us back, the front door swinging open before I could insert the key. Inside, the air felt charged, expectant. That night, after tucking the children into bed, Sarah and I sat in the kitchen, voices low. "We'll find a hotel tomorrow," she insisted. "Call a realtor. This place isn't normal." "They'll just follow us," I said, realizing the truth as I spoke it. Grandmother's notes mentioned it. They form attachments. The children have seen them now, spoken to them. They won't let go easily. "So what do we do? Live with whatever they are?" I thought of my brother's warning, of my grandmother's bargain. Maybe we can negotiate, set boundaries. We raced up the stairs to find Peter's room in disarray, books thrown from shelves, furniture overturned. Peter stood calmly in the center of the chaos. "They're showing us what they can do," he said, "if we try to leave again." "That's enough," I shouted into the air. "Leave my children alone." The wind died instantly. The room went still. Then, from the hallway, came the sound of my grandmother's tape recorder, which I'd left in my bedroom, clicking on. Not a recording this time. Something was using the machine to communicate. A chorus of voices, children and adults, speaking in eerie unison. "The terms of our arrangement are simple. The children acknowledge us, play with us, tell us stories. In return, the Blackwood family prospers. The house protects you." "And if we refuse?" Sarah demanded. A pause, then, "Others have tried. Ask about your great-uncle Frederick. Ask about cousin Eliza. Ask why your father ran and never looked back." In the sudden silence, Emma appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Thomas says Grandma Eleanor understood," she yawned. "He says she was their friend for a very long time." Later that night, unable to sleep, I returned to the attic. There had to be more. Something in my grandmother's possessions that would explain how to end this, how to break the cycle. The trunk with my name had been moved. Now it sat directly under the single hanging bulb, lid open invitingly. Inside, where the tapes had been, lay a leather-bound journal I hadn't noticed before. My grandmother's handwriting filled the pages. Decades of observations, theories, and finally confessions. "The entities are neither malevolent nor benevolent," she wrote. "They exist alongside us, feeding on attention, on belief. The children provide what they crave most, recognition, the ability to be seen. I turned page after page, reading her methodical documentation of the house phenomena. The final entry, dated just days before her death, made my hands shake. I am the last of my generation who remembers them, who honors the pact. I leave the house to Michael because he was always their favorite. They spoke of him often, even after he grew up and could no longer see them. They have waited for his return, for his children. They are not to be feared but respected. The Blackwood family has prospered because of them, not despite them. To break faith now would bring consequences I dare not contemplate. Remember them. Let the children see them, that is all they ask. A small price for protection in an uncertain world. As I closed the journal, the temperature in the attic plummeted. My breath clouded in front of me. "Grandmother?" I whispered. No response. But in the silence I felt watched by countless eyes. Patient eyes. Ancient eyes. They had been here before the house was built, would remain long after it crumbled. We were temporary. They were permanent. I turned slowly. In the dim light stood what appeared to be a child, a boy of perhaps 8, dressed in clothes from another century. But his eyes had seen decades pass like days. "Thomas," I said, recognizing him from memories long suppressed. He smiled, head tilting at an impossible angle. "You remember me." "What happens now?" His form flickered like an old television signal. "Now you understand the arrangement. The children play with us, acknowledge us, and your family remains safe." "For how long?" "Until the next generation takes ownership, as it has always been." Thomas disappeared, leaving me alone in the attic. But as I descended the stairs, I understood we would never truly be alone in this house again. Part 6. The New Normal. 3 months passed. Fall turned to early winter. On the surface, we adjusted to life in Grandmother Eleanor's house. Peter's wrist healed. Emma started kindergarten. Sarah found a job teaching at the local community college. I converted the attic into an office, surrounded by my grandmother's research, learning, understanding. The friends became part of our routine. Emma set extra places at her tea parties. Peter left his video games running for invisible opponents. We grew accustomed to footsteps in empty rooms, to toys that moved by themselves, to whispered conversations behind closed doors. Sarah still wanted to leave, but each time we discussed it, something would happen. A minor accident, a near miss, a reminder of vulnerability. "The house is valuable," the realtor told me, when I finally called to assess our options. "But there's history. Several previous sales have fallen through." "What kind of history?" I asked, though I already knew. "Deaths, accidents, nothing directly tied to the property, but unusual patterns. The Blackwood house has a reputation locally." I hung up, staring at Grandmother's journal. The entries detailed decades of incidents when previous owners had tried to sell. A family in the 1970s whose car brakes failed mysteriously the day after listing the property. A couple in the 1990s whose son developed an inexplicable illness that disappeared the moment they took the house off the market. "Daddy, come see what Thomas taught me." I found Emma in the living room, performing an elaborate hand-clapping game with an empty space across from her. Her hands moved in perfect synchronization with something I couldn't see, creating complex patterns. "Thomas says this game is very old," she informed me solemnly, "from before there was electricity." I watched my daughter's hands meeting invisible ones, their movements perfectly coordinated. A chill ran through me. "Emma," I asked carefully, "what else does Thomas teach you?" She smiled. "Lots of things, about the house, About the family. He knows everything that happens here. Does he hurt you or scare you? Emma looked puzzled. No, silly. Thomas is my friend. He protects me. That night I found Sarah in our bedroom, packing a suitcase. What are you doing? I asked. Taking the kids to my mother's, just for a while. This isn't healthy, Michael. The children are too attached to these things. We've talked about this, I said. It's not safe to break the arrangement. Listen to yourself, Sarah hissed. You sound like you're in a cult. These are our children, Michael. Whatever game your grandmother was playing, I won't sacrifice our kids to it. The bedroom door slammed shut by itself. The lights flickered wildly. From the walls came a sound like dozens of people breathing in unison. Stop, I commanded the air. You're frightening her. The phenomena ceased immediately. The message was clear. They were listening. Always listening. 1 week, I told Sarah, holding her trembling form. Give me 1 week to figure out a solution. There has to be a way to end this properly. 5 days later I found it, hidden in a false bottom of grandmother's trunk. A smaller journal, its pages filled with what looked like ritual instructions. The Binding and Unbinding of House Entities, read the title page in faded ink, as practiced by the Blackwood family since 1887. My grandmother had been more than an observer. She'd been a practitioner of something much older, something passed down through generations. The journal detailed methods of communicating with the entities, of setting boundaries, of severing connections if necessary. But the unbinding ritual required sacrifice, not blood or life, but memory. Whoever performed it would forget everything about the entities and be forgotten by them in return. A clean break, but at the cost of part of oneself. I copied the ritual instructions carefully, planning each step. Tomorrow night, when the barrier between worlds was thinnest according to the journal, I would perform the unbinding, free my family from this inheritance. Emma stood in the doorway, watching me with uncharacteristic stillness. Thomas says what you're planning won't work, she said flatly. He says Grandma tried it once too. The house won't let you. A sudden wind scattered my notes across the room. The journal slammed shut. They're angry now, Daddy, Emma whispered. Really angry. All across the room, glass objects began to crack. Photo frames, windows, light bulbs. The temperature plummeted. I'm trying to protect our family, I told the air around us. Emma's head tilted, listening. Then she spoke in a voice not entirely her own, a child's voice layered with something ancient. We are your family. We have always been your family. 5 generations of Blackwoods have lived under our protection. We have kept you safe from what lurks beyond. Beyond what? I demanded. Emma smiled, but the expression wasn't hers. Beyond the veil, the things that hunger, the things that would consume rather than simply observe. Part 7. The Truth Revealed. That night, as the house settled into darkness, I sat alone in my grandmother's study. The unbinding ritual lay before me, but doubt had crept in. What if Emma, or whatever spoke through her, was right? What if these entities were a form of protection against something worse? I found a key I hadn't noticed before, small and tarnished, taped to the underside of the desk drawer. It fit a locked cabinet across the room. Inside was a single item, a small wooden box containing glass photographic plates from the early 1900s. Each was labeled with a date and the word manifestation. I held the plates up to the light. What I saw made me drop them in horror. The photographs showed the entities, not as children saw them, but as they truly were. Distorted human-like forms occupying the spaces around oblivious adults, standing behind chairs, looming over beds. Their features were wrong. Too many eyes, mouths in impossible places, limbs that bent backward. But even more disturbing were the other things captured in the photographs, darker shapes pressing against windows, clawing at doors, held at bay by the house entities. A note fell from among the plates, written in my grandmother's hand. The watchers serve as guardians, keeping the outside at bay. They require acknowledgement, the simple belief of children, to maintain their strength. In return, they guard the boundaries. Break this covenant at your peril. There are worse things than being watched. I gathered the shattered plates, cutting my fingers in the process. Blood dripped onto the photographs, seeming to make the images move, writhe. "Show me," I whispered. "Show me what's out there." The study door burst open. Wind whipped through the room, extinguishing the lights. In the darkness, the air itself seemed to tear open. Shadows pressed against the walls. Not Thomas's familiar entities, but something else. Darker, hungrier. Shapes that defied geometry, limbs that stretched and twisted, mouths opening in places mouths should never exist. I understood then what my grandmother's photographs had been warning about. These were the things the house entities kept at bay, the outsiders, the ones that hungered for more than just observation. A voice, Thomas's voice, cut through the chaos. No longer a child's whisper, but something ancient and powerful. "Do you understand now?" The words echoed from everywhere and nowhere. "We are not the monsters. We are the guardians." The darkness pressed closer. I could feel something trying to push through, something that would consume everything, family, memory, reality itself. "Choose," Thomas's voice commanded. "Acknowledge us or face what waits beyond." Epilogue. 3 days later, life seemed normal. Too normal. Sarah unpacked groceries in the kitchen. Peter played video games. Emma drew at the dining room table, her hand moving in precise rhythmic motions, a game only she could see. I sat in my study, staring at the shattered photographic plates. The images were gone now, wiped clean as if they'd never existed, but I remembered. "Daddy," Emma called, "Thomas says lunch is ready." Sarah looked up and smiled. "Coming, sweetie." And we were fine. We were always fine. Final message. To those listening, some stories are not meant to be fully understood. Some secrets are best left in the shadows. The Blackwood house stands. The entities wait. Always watching. Subscribe to the Obscuralore Vault for more terrifying true stories. Sleep well if you can.